All right, Working Man Investor here with Jack's Business Talk. I'm Tom, and this is Jack. Today, we're just going to discuss the latest tariff that President Trump has just put on our economy and on other countries, and he's got some interesting points, as I feel like I do. We're just going to have a quick discussion on what's going on. How you doing, Jack?
Good. How about yourself?
I cannot complain. Got hit in the stock market Thursday and Friday, but other than that, I'm doing well. So no real complaints. So, yeah, you just want to go ahead and start. I know you said you had a bunch of notes and a bunch of stuff you wanted to talk on. So, if you want to go ahead and lead, I'll just kind of chime in here with my different takes and my different opinions on what's going on right now in the economy.
Yeah. So Trump kept saying, for example, in his speech that it's a friendly, easygoing tariff across the country with 10% and stuff, and just different product supplies are going to be affected differently and stuff. And according to what I was looking at, this is the largest tariff increase since World War II.
Hmm.
When you add up everything, and even and I'm just using like the least impacted tariff products. So with that with that being said, it is so to give you an idea of why it's so detrimental is back during like World War II era, we were only importing 3.9% into the country, where today we're doing 13 point, it's like 13.3, I think it was 13 and a half, was what we're importing. Plus, this is just the bare minimum stuff. So anyway, the reason why this is important is we're so reliant on the other countries, and to slap everyone with a tariff, you're going to end up. And the whole reason why he's doing this is so that he can with hopefully with the tariff money, to have the people that make less than 150K a year to not be paying any taxes. And that's exactly who's going to get affected the most, because the people that are buying your regular products and stuff, your imported stuff, which is usually cheaper, are going to be paying it at the register. So it's interesting to hear him talk about that. And a few something interesting I found when he was talking about with his lists and chart and stuff is that Mexico and Canada were not on the list of even the flat 10% tariff rates.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I found that interesting too, and I also thought it was interesting that Russia wasn't on there at all. Now, I did see today, I didn't read the article yet, but that Taiwan has come out and said that they're going to drop all tariffs against the United States and won't pursue reciprocal tariffs. So hopefully that's some good news that this is going in the right direction. Yeah, this is the biggest tax increase I believe since Smoot-Hawley back in 1930, which while it didn't cause the Great Depression like a lot of people seem to think it did. It did prolong the Great Depression simply because when you tariff and other countries tariff you back, you're not going to be able to export on the scale that you need to because you've been cut off from the global economy, and that was our problem with the Great Depression. As far as this goes, he wants to bring back manufacturing, and it's no secret that tariffs are inflationary. You hit on that, and it's going to affect everybody. Inflation's a tax on everybody, but it hurts the people, the families that make 150,000 and less, the worst. Somebody who's worth several million can is going to be fine. Somebody who's trying to feed a family of four on $80,000 is now in complete panic mode. So that those are the ones I'm most concerned about. I have other concerns too. One was us being the reserve currency of the world. The only way for other countries to get the dollar is to produce goods and services and sell it to us, and we pay for it in dollars. If we do that, now the dollar is currently weakening because of recession fears and inflation fears, which has a tendency to weaken a country's currency. But it's just a matter of time if these tariffs stay in place where these countries can't get a hold of the dollar. That's going to increase demand for the dollar to pay off dollar denominated debt. And it's just supply and demand. They need the
Mhm.
dollars, and you can't get the dollars. It's going to strengthen the dollar. So now we're looking at having a strong currency, which is a nightmare for exporting because it's good better for importing because you can buy more of the other country's product with a strong currency than you can for export. It's a nightmare for exporting because it takes more of their currency to buy from us. So then that the fact that our standard of living is so much higher than so many of these countries, we have to pay our employees more, which increases the cost of production. So now you have stuff you can't produce as cheaply as other countries, and your currency is going to be stronger than them. I just don't see any way for us to bring manufacturing back in mass to this country. I really don't. You'll get some, but not a lot, and it'll be sold domestically at an elevated price. It's not likely to be exported. And that's how you reduce the trade deficit like he wants to. You sell more than you buy, you export more than you import. But there's so many factors working against the United States. The 50s and 60s are over. We're not going
Yeah,
back to that. I don't believe. I don't see any way possible. So, yeah, if you what do you think? Do you agree, disagree? It's okay to
I
disagree
agree.
with
Yeah,
me. I mean,
it'd be great if we could bring at least like the certain industries back that we would be reliant on. Where I'm talking like your prescription, your pharmaceutical type of stuff, and anything you would need, like the technology or anything that you would need for like the military and all that kind of stuff. But outside of that, I don't see how much you're really going to bring back. And even if you did bring those back, the only way I really see it working, and granted, this isn't what I'm about to say, a capitalistic thing at all, is if they're heavily propped and paid by the government themselves, and reimbursed, is really the only way it's going to work. Because you can't expect, even doing these tariffs and stuff, all you're doing is passing the buck onto the consumer. And unless the government is going to actually pay the difference, is really about the only way it's going to work. But
yeah.
I know,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, I was going to say, but yeah, Trump was talking also about the auto parts stuff and all these. The one guy who was representing the USAW, the was it United States Auto Workers,
Hmm.
and he was talking about we have all these abandoned manufacturing plants and they're going to have them build parts and all this stuff, and that way they're in the US and we have more jobs. That's great, but you know what? You drive by any of those plants and they're usually for some type of make and model of vehicle that isn't around anymore. So like I'll use my local area out in I drive past a couple times a year, a Chevy manufacturing plant out in Lordstown, Ohio, and it's still set up for the Malibu, and not even like the newest Malibu. It's up like the early, like the mid. No, sorry, I'm wrong. They switched it from the Malibu. It was set up for the Volt, which I don't even know if they still make the Volt.
I don't know either.
Yeah, so it's set up for a car. So like you're gonna have to spend millions, maybe even billions, to retool and refigure that plant to make it operational again. So I think what most of these may or these big companies, or what they're going to end up doing is they're going to say, yeah, we're going to do this, and they'll just, make the promises and stuff, and they're just going to wait until basically the Trump term is done, and then and hopefully bank on, free trade at that point to come back.
Yeah, yeah. Not only that, instead of retooling and spending millions or billions to upgrade and manufacture these warehouses, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they might rather just put half of that money into a presidential candidate that's going to be free trade and back that individual, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, it won't matter.
Hmm.
And you're absolutely right about government. Basically, what it's subsidizing these American companies just to keep them competitive and be able to keep them here. And that was one of my biggest concerns because everything you do in economics, there's an unintended consequence with it. So let's just say we reshore PPE. Okay. So the N95 mask and all the stuff that we need in case of another pandemic. We saw the nightmare that it was during COVID, where we couldn't get it from China and we had doctors and nurses wearing masks made at home. My wife was actually, she was still working at the time, and she was a corrections officer, and my mom made her a mask out of just sewed her a mask just so she had something to cover her face with when she was dealing with, these people that get arrested. They come right off the streets. You don't know where they've been, or who they've been around, or what they have. And there was no testing, so we couldn't test them. They couldn't test them as soon as they came in. So let's say we reshore PPE. What's the unintended consequences of that? Well, we manufacture it here, and we create some jobs, possibly middle income class jobs, and a new tax revenue source. And we will raise some people out of lower income to the middle income through there. By doing that, that's great. The unintended consequence is the American worker cannot work for $5 a day like they can in Mexico. They need, depending on where you open the shop at, $15, $20 an hour. You're going to have to give them some type of health insurance, because otherwise you're going to get them trained. They can't stay because they need health insurance. They're going to have to go look for another job. That's another expense. They're going to probably want some type of a retirement, a fat matching 401k, maybe not a deal breaker, but if the competitors are offering it, these companies do. So all this increases cost. So because of this, they can't sell this PPE to the hospitals as cheap as they can from getting it from China or Mexico. So
Hmm.
the unintended consequences of that is the hospital eventually has to pass the expenses of all this PPE onto their patients. And we've already got a crisis almost with this country in affordable health care. So that's one of my big problems. And then in turn, to try to combat that, yeah, the government can subsidize these plants, every quarter, and I'm making this number up, throw $10 million of subsidy to make them profitable so they stay in this country. That's fine, but you do enough of that, we start to offset any savings we're getting from Doge. We're just cutting government jobs, and then taking the money and subsidizing these new manufacturing jobs. It's not really cost effective. And this happened back in 2018. And I wish I had the notes in front of it. It's on one of my videos that I talked about when Trump tariffed steel. The Chinese retaliated against our agriculture, and he had to end up taking some money and subsidize our farmers because they were hurting. And you can't have farmers going out of business. So the unintended consequences make me really, really nervous too. There's just, I don't blame him for trying this, even though I don't think it works. I don't want this video to come across as, political. I'm just looking at the facts and looking what I know about economics and what I've studied, and trying to determine if it's going to
Hmm.
work. And I think nice effort, but I just don't think it's going to work. I really don't. So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come across like I'm poo-pooing on Trump either, but it's just common sense is going to tell you that there's a lot of stuff that's not being considered when he's talking about the stuff. And one of the arguments he talked about was he was saying at one point that at one time tariffs funded all the I'll say the federal government, and was able to, that they didn't even have a tax back then. But when you start to dig deeper, you find out that these years is like 1913.
mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, you in 1913 didn't go through two world wars, you didn't go through Vietnam, you didn't go through the Korean War, you didn't go through all those wars yet. You did, you didn't have Social Security, you didn't have Medicaid and Medicare, you didn't have, the government didn't fund hospitals, it didn't fund roads, it didn't fund schools. So, I mean, there's what the federal government was like, what? I don't know the number, but if I had to guess, I'd say probably a 20th of the size that it is today.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you didn't have federal pensions either. And again, that's not
Exactly.
a
Yeah, that
political
too.
shot on our federal workers. I mean, my parents live off their pension, so I'm not anti-pension, but it's just a fact that it's an excuse. It's not an excuse. It's an expense for the taxpayer. So yeah, and you hit on, so that's a really good point. I was going to mention that too. He talks about tariffs, and we didn't have an income tax. We also didn't have the welfare programs that we have now. That the Social Security. Not that I'm comparing it to welfare, but welfare in itself, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these social programs that I'm not saying I'm against, but it's just wasn't around 100 plus years ago that it is now, and thinking you're going to pay for that in tariffs, I just don't believe so, especially when you have all these countries and we're a global economy now. 112 years ago, we weren't a global economy. We were a domestic economy. And it wasn't such a thing as, like Nike. Nike's a good example of this. They started off with all their shops in China. Then they retooled it to Vietnam because the Chinese middle class expanded so much over the past several decades that their wages have gone up, their labor has gone up. China is now starting to lose manufacturing jobs similar to the way we did because their companies are looking for cheaper labor. And that's why Nike invested a ton of money into Vietnam because the labor is cheaper. That's the Cantillon effect, which
Mhm.
I've studied quite a bit. You people move into luxuries, your middle class expands. You want to keep that standard of living. You demand a higher pay raise, a higher wage. The companies give it to you. Your cost of production goes higher because your employees are more expensive. Then your exports become more expensive. Then these foreign countries go, man, it's really getting expensive for us to import this. Let's build factories here with the sole purpose of blocking it to keep them out. So they'll build these factories to produce it there because they can produce it cheaply. At first, it's garbage when they first
Mhm.
make it. It's like everything else when we were kids, you were doing something and you were bad at it. What'd your parents say? Well, keep doing it. You'll get better. Keep practicing. The foreign producer keeps practicing, and eventually, that stuff that they're manufacturing is just as good as the stuff that the other countries exporting to them. And because of that, it's cheaper. Their civilian citizens start buying their made domestic product. And then it goes 360. The other country goes under and they start exporting it to that country. So that's kind of how that works. And that's just a problem that we're at. We're at a point where our standard of living is just too high for us to go back to the 50s and 60s. The days of the husband working in the warehouse and supporting a family of four are over, unfortunately. I'd love for it to come back, but I just don't see it. So,
Yeah, I agree. And the other thing I would like to just add to that is the only way there's two things, and I it'd have to be in conjunction with each other to stand any possible chance of the U.S. taking control of being the financial powerhouse it used to be. And you would have to use robotics, and I'll give you an example, like with what I do for a living. We build syringes that the dyes are filled with, for your that get injected into you for your CT and your MRI scans. So we have a line that's from the 80s, and it requires 22 people, depending on the configuration that we're running. Our newest line that was still just is finishing up, like it's just about to go live here probably in the next month or so, requires 6 people
mhm.
just because of all the robotics, the extra robotics and stuff. So that's one thing. You have to get more robotics, and even you'd have to get even more than what the place I work for is doing. Like you need to get to a point where you have like an operator, some maintenance techs, and almost completely eliminate middle management to the point where you just have your upper management, because you might only have like I'll just use for example where I'm at, where you have 6 production lines producing, like I 80 or like 4, 8, 130. Let's call it 200,000 pieces per shift. So about half a million, because daylight has more people than what we have. So we'll call it half a million for a 24-hour span. You'd have to get that number down half to be able to be competitive. And the other thing you have to do is the US would have to do what China's doing, where they're just trying to completely destroy the market, and they're just trying to sell their stuff at more or less just flood the market with all their stuff and just completely bankrupt everyone else. But and even in the US with our, like you said, with our high level of living, it's just not going to happen, because you're going to have people that are going to be willing to sleep on dirt, to
Mhm.
make the extra dollar and stuff. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think you're right with AI that we could potentially begin manufacturing again that way. Simply because we have the infrastructure in place to protect those warehouses and those buildings. We have the law enforcement in place, and we have the the counter intelligence to protect it from hackers and things like that, compared to like a Vietnam or a Malaysia. So that in that standpoint, I could definitely see it. But as far as warehouses filled with 600 employees doing very basic tasks, that's going to be your Malaysias and Vietnams and Chinas. But yeah, with robotics, I could see that happening. But there again, it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs. But it could also greatly increase our GDP, which could
Hmm.
potentially, and this is a hot button topic, lead to like a universal basic income, to where if we were able to get our debt down, and then we get to the point where we get our GDP so high and we're producing with AI, and then we're lacking on jobs, you could do some type of a universal basic income. I read somewhere where they were suggesting, say, like I work in the steel mills. I'm one of the last manufacturing jobs in this country. I'm a steel worker. And right now, my mill runs, I think, 3,800 people in my particular mill. Let's just say it takes 1,000 robots to do what we do. So they eliminate basically all the people and bring in 1,000 robots. One way you could possibly raise money for UAB is to tax the company a certain amount for every robot that they're using. And it could still be kind of a win-win, because the robot's more productive. The robot doesn't get sick. The robot doesn't call off. The robot doesn't need health insurance, 401k, a pension, things like that. So that's some of the things I've seen floated. If we were ever to go, heavy AI and become an exporting hub of the world again, that'd be one way we could still support our society. It's just a theory. I mean, I don't know how it'll work, and we don't even know if AI is going to advance to that anyways. We think it is, but we don't know for sure. Anything could still happen. So,
You made me think of something cool. It's a little bit off topic, but I got to take a tour once of a steel mill, and they were just bringing like the robotic stuff was really just starting to hit the scene. And they said for them in this one plant, most of their accidents were done with fork truck drivers when they're trying to load the hot. There was a they would roll the coils out and they would
mhm.
load them on the trucks. And they said that a lot of times because of the atmosphere is a little bit on the tight side, so the coils would fall over on the forklift driver or over on the other side. It's just they had a number of accidents for that. So they brought robots in and they decreased the number of accidents by like 90 some odd percent.
Yeah, yeah.
And it only crushed one robot fork truck thing. And they
Mhm.
said it was actually the robot's fault. It glitched up and like shook the steel coil and it fell over on top of it.
Yeah, the steel mill is a dangerous place. I've
Yeah.
been out there for 14 years. Now I'm fortunate enough to have an office job, but I started my first 7, 8 years in the steel mill, running a side shear and cutting plates of steel as they came down the line. And it's a dangerous place. You got to be careful in there. So yeah, I can definitely see spots where AI and robots could make it a lot safer for the employees, which would be great. I mean, that's what you want.
Hmm.
I had my thumb smashed out there once by a mushroom magnet, a big round magnet that's used to grab steel. It got my thumb got caught between a steel plate and the magnet. So fortunately, it wasn't as serious as it sounds. I mean, I still have use of my thumb, but you got to be so careful because it happens so fast, and there's no
Hmm.
turning back once it happens. So yeah, I could definitely see robots and AI playing a role in manufacturing in this country just for safety purposes, like you
Yeah.
say, definitely. So yeah, you got anything else to add about the Trump and the tariffs? I think we kind of agreed pretty much.
Uh the I can't remember if I said in a live stream. I know we talked about this off camera. Did I mention while recording the position of the big three?
No, that was off. I believe that was off camera.
Yeah, so before we end this, I want to mention so they're trying to produce or bring in more or like try to help out the big three, you know, your GM, Ford, and Mopar. I guess they renamed it something else, but for my mental bandwidth, it's still gonna be called Mopar. You know, that's your Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, all that stuff. So anyway, your big three, you would think, are totally U.S. America, you know. So the number one most biggest manufacturer vehicle here in the U.S. it's Volkswagen. And it's just because Volkswagen does a different strategy where it's more beneficial for instead of having them ship their cars overseas and dealing with of all that type of stuff, it's more beneficial for them to put the plants in the countries, just smaller plants. That way they can build them for that country. So like, Volkswagen, if you don't know, is made in Germany. I'm more or less talking to our audience. So I'm sure you know that.
Mhm.
But so one of the biggest things is the vehicles is made for someone driving on the right side of the road. Well, over here, we're used to driving on the left side of the road. So they can just re-gear it up real quick and it's not a big deal. And so that was number one. Number two, I forget, but it kind of caught me off guard. I think it was I think it was Honda or Hyundai or something. I want to say it was Honda, but don't quote me on that because I'm not positive on that. Honestly, I was surprised it wasn't Toyota. But the first of the big three was GM at number 27, and then Ford was 31st, and Mopar, or no, sorry, Mopar was 31st, and Ford was 37th. I think that's right. I might have got Ford and Mopar mixed up. But regardless, if you're trying to help the big three, the big, US American companies, don't you think they'd be in the top five?
Mhm. Yeah, you'd think so. Yeah, I mean, clearly they do have to manufacture more in this country. And I think we will get some of it. I had read an article that Honda was talking about opening up a plant here in Indiana to produce strictly the Civic, 200,000 Honda Civics for the were going to be produced there, and everybody was talking. And again, this isn't a shot at Trump. I don't mean it this way, but everybody that it's a huge Trump supporter is saying that this is a win for him. Like, well, you got to look at what this does. First, my first thought process is 200,000 doesn't sound like a lot of cars. So I Googled how many Honda Civics are sold in the United States, and I read that it's the number one small, medium compact car in the United States. So that made sense why they're going to produce it here. They don't want to lose their market share. So then my buddies, one of my friends is telling me about this while we're at lunch. He goes, yeah, I don't think you understand. It's going to take a while for them to build a plant. I'm like, yeah. And then they have to close the Mexican plant, the plant in Mexico. I'm like, no, don't think you understand. They're going to build a plant in this country to avoid the tariffs. They will add 1,500 employees to do it, which is great. But these cars are going to be sold for $8,000 to $12,000 more because they're manufactured here more. And that plant in Mexico that you're talking about will never be closed. They will continue to manufacture Honda Civics there, and that will be the exporting hub to the world because the labor is cheaper. They're not going to close the Mexican plant and then build a plant here and build, and I'm making this number up, 2 million Honda Civics and export it to the world from here. That's not going to happen. They'll do 200,000 and sell it to the American people, to us, but that Mexico plant's going to stay open, and that's where they're going to ship to the world from, to the rest of the world from. And that's, again, it goes back to the problem that we have.
I read somewhere that there's a loophole in his whole tariff plan. So like if companies do like a certain percentage and everything's kind of up in the air and I couldn't find the exact numbers, which is why I didn't really bring it up till now. But if a certain percentage of something equals more of the company being for the US consumer being purchased of the product, so we'll just use Honda Civic. So let's make up numbers. 51% of Honda Civics are made here in the US. They can import the rest of them, tariff, like just with your normal pre-Trump tariff.
Okay.
So that so going with what you're saying, they still wouldn't close down the Mexico plant because it's still cheaper, and then they can still give the U.S. consumer a discount because they're pumping in all the cars from Mexico still. It's just
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it, it won't be as drastic of a hit, but even that, like we talked about before, it's not going to create as many jobs because like if you've seen a car manufacturer plant like from videos all over the web and stuff, there's not a lot of people there. There's just not. Like you have a couple people there that, that use robotics to make sure that the pins line up for the motor and the transmission brackets and that kind of stuff. They might put it in the car seat or something. But 90, but I want to say like at least 70 to 90, somewhere 70 to 90%, it's all robotics. Like
Hmm.
there's no one in a paint booth anymore. Like they have machines doing all that now.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting though about if they did like 51%, then it would come back across the border tariff free. Um, yeah, and then, my biggest fear still is that, and I may have said this earlier. I don't know if I did. So if I did, stop me. I'm losing track of what we talked about. Just basically the tariff starving. I mentioned the tariff starving the world of the dollar.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's my big concern here. You can't be the reserve currency of the world and be the exporting king of the world. It's why we fell apart in the 70s. It's why Nixon took us off the gold standard because all these countries were coming and we were always running a trade deficit and they were coming and they were turning in their dollars for our gold. And we got to the point where there was $60 billion in the global economy and we had 10 billion in gold here. That's when Nixon severed us from the gold standard. That's the problem of being the reserve currency of the world. It's why we lose our manufacturing too. It's just because the only way to get the dollar out there is to have other countries produce it and sell us stuff, import it to us. Then we pay with the dollars. And what has me really nervous is you have a lot of countries, and China does this a lot. If you ever Google China debt trap, they're really good at this. And it's not good. They'll take, since they sell us a lot of stuff, they get a lot of dollars. And they just did this to Laos, which is a small Asian country. They will take, they'll get their dollars from us, from exporting to us. First thing they'll do is they'll settle any global transactions they need to settle in the dollar, and they keep a dollar reserve. And then when they have excess dollars, it's just like you and me. If you need like $100 and I give you $100, it has nothing to do with a bank. We just draw up maybe a contract, and I'm going to charge you 10% for a month you have to pay me back this $100. So what China's doing is they're taking like $8 billion and they're loaned it to Laos. It has nothing to do with the United States government, our citizens, our banks. It's just excess dollars they had gotten. They loan it to Laos so they were building like solar powered batteries. This money has to be paid back in dollars. And the only way for Laos to get dollars is to export to us. So now we have this tariff on it, which is going to make it tough for them to export and get dollars to pay back China. There's all kinds of these loans out there, dollar denominated debts and loans out in the global economy from multiple countries to multiple countries. So if we tariff and block everybody from getting dollars, it's going to cause a liquidity crisis in the global economy. That is one of my big concerns too. And that we're damaging other countries' faith in the United States now. And when you're $36 trillion in debt and the only thing back in your dollar is people's faith in it, that's not good.
Hmm.
So as people stop buying our debt, stop buying our treasuries, you could get to a point where all that money comes back to this country and we suffer hyperinflation and all fall into poverty. Now that can't happen, I don't think, until there's another currency out there that can compete with the dollar in the global economy. And right now there isn't. Nobody else is positioned to do it. But it's still, to me, this is just another hit to us as a reserve currency. And other countries looking at it, and you got more countries now thinking, maybe we need to get away from the dollar. Maybe we can't trust the United States like we thought. And this is all stuff that nobody's really talking about. It bothers me. The news channels and stuff, they're not really talking about it. And they should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I got. You got anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, great. I appreciated doing this, man. Definitely can do it again. Anybody wants to find me, I'm at Working Man Investor on YouTube. Why don't you go ahead and stay where you're at so I can let my viewers know? So,
Um,
Jack's
and if anyone,
Business Talk.
yep.
All right, YouTube. And you got anything else? Twitter or anything?
sometimes X. I haven't posted anything up on there in a while. Everything's on YouTube though.
Okay, great. Yeah, me too. All right, man. I appreciate the time, man. And we got to do this again. It's the second time now. It's been good experience both times. So I always enjoy having you on.
Definitely. Yeah, we'll do this again.
Okay, great.